You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
Congressman Phil Roe from the great state of Tennessee, welcome back to the Final Say Radio Show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Oh, Brett, thanks very much for having me today. Hope you had a great Easter.
Oh, I was just going to ask you the same. I hope you and your family had a wonderful Easter and a few days off from the madness that we call Washington.
Well, we did, and the Roe family is, we're going to be really tired at the end of this week. My wife and I have our two grandkids here, 7 and 9, so by Friday when my son gets here, we'll be really glad to see them probably.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. And I'm sure that you would rather spend time with your grandkids than running back to Washington to be discussing things such as health care, which we've been screaming from the hilltops about for years.
It is, and we've had, of course, Tennessee was in the limelight last week, Brett, as you know,
yes,
with Governor Haslam, and I spoke to the governor on last Tuesday before he made his announcement on Wednesday, and he made a very compelling argument after we discussed why he made the decision that he did, and I think it was the right decision.
No, and it's interesting because not just on this particular issue, but I was reading in the AP Newswire today that it's now being discussed, this fact that people are going to be getting credits from the federal government to help subsidize them purchasing health care plans if they don't have one through an employee on the state exchanges. The only problem is that they're going to give these credits based on past income when people don't specifically know what their income is during the year they're getting it or the next year. So they're going to face the possibility, if they have higher income, that they're going to have to refund the government for this part of this credit. And
yeah, well, good luck in getting that back.
Well, it begs the question: why would you set it up in such a way? And then I was looking into this article further, and evidently the form that you even have to file to get into this program is a 15-page form. And I'm thinking to myself, Congressman, people don't even know how to fill out the 6 lines to renew their driver's licenses. How are they going to fill out a 15-page form to get a credit?
Well, it's actually worse than that. I was so glad to be out of D.C. for a little while because I left a week ago with a headache. We spent about 3 hours really, really peeling this onion back, and we had a large, I won't mention which one, we had a large HR firm, and we spent an hour and a half with, and I don't think Doug Holtz-Eakin will mind me mentioning his name. We had our health caucus met with Doug who's the former CBO director under President Bush. We met with him for about an hour, and when you look at a business, think about it being a fast food business, and you're going to try to figure out how many full-time equivalents you have in your business when many of them have 100% turnover or more every year. I mean, like when I was in college, I would work for a while at a job. In the summer, I'd have a different job, when I was out of school. And you have to figure out how many FTEs you have. You also have to figure out not what your employee's income is to get qualified for this credit, but what the household income is. So now as an employer, you're on the hook for figuring out. When I thought about that as an employer, which I was for over 30 years, I didn't know what the household income of my employees was. I didn't have any idea what their husbands or their other wives made. So it is incredibly complicated, and it's going to be a nightmare when this unfolds, trying to figure out with just what you said, whether you owe money back or don't owe it. And by the way, it's 21 pages now, not 15.
Wow, of course. You know, Congressman, you brought up something that is a good lead into a question I had, which is, part of the legitimate complaint that people had about needing medical reform in this country is the fact that people's insurance being tied to their jobs in some ways actually created a wide new series of problems. But it seems to me that there are 2 new major issues here. One, as you're pointing out, is there's an entire new class and requirement of paperwork and information that needs to be done, and of course in who knows how many languages, which will have an enormous cost. The other is anytime you make any of these, when you have decisions dependent upon anything other than somebody making a good use of how to spend their money and what the reward is or the benefit of that service, you're tying people's insurance or health care now to potentially a whole new array of, let's call them medical handcuffs. And it seems to me that all of this even if it's trying to do well, is just going to drive a deeper wedge between a doctor and a patient, which is really what healthcare is all about.
It is, and I have been screaming this now for the 4 years, now going on 5 years that I've been in the U.S. Congress, that the problem with the healthcare system is it costs too much money. We've talked about it on your show many times. It's too expensive. I've also seen it in my own practice. Hospital bills are indecipherable. You can't tell what you've been charged for, how much it costs. So we have to get some transparency. We also have to get control of the cost. And you hit the nail on the head. Until it is consumer-driven, it will ultimately either collapse under its own weight or cost so much money we can't afford it, and then we'll ration it. And you get the argument, and there's no question there's some truth in this. You need the person that needs to be rationed in the care is the patient and the doctor with a decision, a competent medical decision made in a doctor's office. That's how it should be done. Look, we're Brett and John, we're the best shoppers in the world. We'll drive across 5 lanes of interstate to get gas 2 cents a gallon cheaper. So don't tell me we can't shop for health care. Most decisions in health care, and I use a health savings account, I have a catastrophic policy in case I have a heart attack or cancer or break my leg or some catastrophic event happens to me. Those other things that I go get done on a daily basis, a routine physical, a routine test that I have, my cholesterol checked, whatever it might be, we negotiate those, and we get a price. I had a friend of mine. To give you an example, in an inpatient testing in a hospital, this particular test, this is a doctor friend of mine in San Antonio, Texas. I just talked to him this past week. Had a patient that was going to go to the hospital. It was going to cost $3,800 to have this test. There was an outpatient clinic nearby that he could pay cash for. He got exactly the same test for $1,000. So, and he got the information he needed. He was happy. The doctor was happy. Everybody, it worked out. It was consumer-driven. He didn't have to delay, wait, whatever. He got the needed tests done. And one of the things that we did here in Tennessee, that when we didn't expand our Medicaid, and look, I want good care for poor people just like I do rich people, people who can afford the best care in the world. And there's no reason they can't get it. Medicaid is not the answer. We saw here in Tennessee, and there were outcomes-based studies that have been done, that patients on Medicaid, a large study just published not long ago, last year, over, I think, 800,000 or 900,000 patients, that they had worse outcomes than people with no insurance. Well, that's a plan that needs to be fixed before we expand it. We need to fix Medicaid, the current system. And right now in Tennessee, it's a huge access problem because it pays so little to the providers that they won't accept it. So the fact that you have a TennCare card, and it's one of the most limited programs in the country. So our governor said, okay, instead of doing that, if the federal government will let us, we're going to let the private market run this. We're going to put those patients, those 170,000 people in our state who are otherwise going to be in the Medicaid plan that isn't working now, we're going to put them in a private plan that they can buy insurance just like you and I have, and they can have access to the best doctors. That's what we want for our people in Tennessee.
You know, Congressman, I was just in France last week, and I actually stayed at a friend's house, which was 200 feet from where Jefferson and Lafayette penned the Bills of Rights. And I spent some time with some embassy folks there. So I had a couple of very interesting political conversations. And the one thing, and I didn't bother diving too deep into it, but the one frequent thing you'll hear it here and you'll also hear it in Europe is, well, you know, the socializing of medicine is actually a good thing because look at us here in Europe, we spend half as much, and by the way, we have better outcomes. Have we had any good studies that like the Congressional Budget Office or anybody gets behind to show what the actual outcomes are in the U.S. versus Europe, and do you have any opinions on that subject?
Yes, and that has been done. And when you compare cancer outcomes in England and Canada, I don't have the data for France, but England or Canada, whether it's prostate cancer, breast cancer, colon cancer, the big three, and by the way, heart disease, which is not outcomes of all those, are all better in the United States. For across the board, they're better. And one of the things that you look at in this country, it's a big, diverse country. If you remove murder, which is hardly a health problem, it may be a mental health, but murder and car wrecks, our outcomes are better than anywhere else in the world. There's a study recently that showed that. And when you extrapolate those things out, and it has nothing to do with health care. We can do better. There's no question about it in this country. We need health care reform. I've been saying that from day one. But this Obamacare plan, I think, is so utterly complex that it's going to crash under its own weight. And I'll tell you who's going to help crash it are the businesses. And we're going to see changes pretty soon. Brett, you're going to see this device tax. What a terrible idea that was. I cannot tell you how many of the new devices I used in the operating room to help patients. Every doctor in the country has in the last 20 years who's a surgeon. And I'm afraid we're going to go into the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages again with discovery. One of the examples I used when I was a freshman medical student in 1969 and 1970 in Memphis, survival rates for childhood cancer at St. Jude's Children's Hospital, it hadn't been open very long, was about 10 or 15%. Today, those numbers have flipped. 85 to 90% of those kids live. That's the kind of innovation we want, and we've shared that with the world. America has. I think 80% or better of new drugs that are brought to market in the world are brought to market in the United States. We do not want to go backwards, and that's what I'm afraid this bill is going to force us to do.
Well, I think what's sad, too, is we have a demonization attitude. And it's not that there's never any corporate corruption, just like the government and every other business, right? Corruption is always a part of the game, and you have to constantly fight it. But when you look at how far this society has come, how much healthier and how much better off we are, that to a large measure is because of big pharma and because of major companies investing. And if there's no positive, if there's not a high reward for that high risk, why would they invest in that new equipment?
Well, Brett, in medical innovation, a lot of it are small companies. These are not your big companies that bring it forward. I remember when Genentech, which made the first recombinant insulin, that was a small company then. It's become a big company, but it started as a small biotech company. And what you'll see, a lot of these device companies are small companies, 50, 7,500 employees, that bring these great new innovations to market. Many of them are gobbled up by bigger companies, but the actual innovation starts in a very nimble, small company that can, and I can think of 2 or 3 things I used in the operating room to lower the length of operating time, the invasiveness of a procedure for a patient, better outcomes. We're all small companies, and I'm afraid with this device tax, they're going to be looking to ship offshore where they can do it cheaper and then re-import it back into the U.S. We do not want that. State of Indiana, Wisconsin, Massachusetts are all big medical innovative states. And I can assure you none of those 3 states want to see that happen.
Yeah, great points, Congressman Roe. I want to bring up a couple more things to this conversation. I had the pleasure to spend a few days off with my cousin who's a doctor as well. And we were talking about some of the issues that he comes across with insurance and working with the hospitals. One would be that the hospitals are trying to, earn some sort of amount of revenue, so they encourage certain types of testing that could be billed to insurance companies to, and they always welcome high dollar testing as opposed to low cost procedures and things of that nature. And what he finds is often he doesn't prescribe it. He ends up leaving places because he refuses to have things ordered that aren't necessary. And then on the other hand, he, having practiced for so long, has come up with his own ways of dealing with different patients depending on what the situation is. And what he finds is that often you could avoid evasive procedures or unnecessary testing by having a better understanding of your patient and different ways of treating them. And I think too often you have people who just, they just go down a checklist. Okay, how do I protect myself from a lawsuit, and what does this particular place I'm working for require? And you check off the box, this test, that test, that test, that test, when half of it is probably unnecessary and also drives up the cost. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I think this is going to be one of the major problems in the future, I was looking on page 1 of the Wall Street Journal today, and they're talking about the visa demand jumping for foreign workers coming here, and I'm referring to the H-1B visas. and they're talking about that we're going to be running out of the availability of these visas. And I'm looking at the medical practice field, thinking to myself, we're not going to have enough doctors or people willing to go to medical school here in this country, and we're going to need people from other countries to fill these positions at some point. And it's going to become an immigration issue as well. I just wanted to bring those two issues up.
No, I think you're right. And one of the things that's happened in medicine, Brett and John, is, and it's being forced. When I left and when I opened my practice, I went out with 3 other guys, hung a shingle up, and got going. And over a period of years, built a very nice practice. You're not going to see that any longer. You're seeing basically a corporatization of medicine, where larger and larger and larger groups are being formed and doctors are being forced into them. I talked to some medical students, and people are saying, well, the doctors now, they just want to work certain hours and they just want to join they want to be an employee. No, they don't. That's their only option now. And you're seeing the older doctors like myself who are looking for the exits in droves, and if you look at all of the survey data, it's showing that. And that's a little scary, because you want your more experienced doctors for 2 reasons. One is that you want them there to help train the younger doctors, and 2, you need them. We have a shortage now, certainly of primary care and many specialists. And I think what your cousin was talking about, Brett, is that something is that we worry about is that individuals don't always fit into a box. When an individual person comes to you, and you're going to look at what is called as evidence-based medicine. We're going to decide what the criteria are to treat a certain disease, and if a doctor falls out of that, they're not a good doctor. What you find out is all patients don't fit in that little box real neatly. Some don't respond where others will. A majority maybe will. And it's the example I would use for my patients. It doesn't matter if you have a condition that's 1 in a million. If you have it, it's 100% for you. So that's what you're paying us for, is that experience to be able to pick up the one that's outside. You don't want to see a doctor who's like your cousin, who's very experienced and knows that every patient is a little different, that he's not allowed to practice and use those skills. And that's a little worrisome in this sort of cookie-cutter type thing that we're being pushed into.
And just like your op-ed from just a few days ago, it falls right in line as what you even said here. The federal government's insistence on a one-size-fits-all approach won't work in Medicare, and it's certainly not going to work in a patient and a doctor relationship, as everybody is different.
Well, you take one dose. I've seen it over and over again. You take one dose, exactly the same condition. Here's a standard dose for that. You give the medication to the patient. One patient will respond very well. The other one does not. And so That's the thing you have to keep in. That's what your cousin was saying.
Well, Congressman, I went to buy a pair of sneakers the other day, and I put on a size 12, and I'm a size 9.5, and it didn't work all that well for me. So I tried the 7.5, and that was a little small. So I said, you know what, let me just stick with my 9.5. It works for me.
Well, if it's made in China, the 12 may have fitted you, so maybe the 7 might fit.
Well, when it gets wet,
Congressman, did you make the mistake of buying 3 or 4 suits while in China as well, only to realize how much fabric they saved?
No, I haven't made that mistake.
Well, please don't. I paid for the 3 of us.
Well, I'll have to tell you, I am, for our listeners, they know I'm an East Tennessee redneck, so when I was sworn in the Congress the last time, I decided that I was going to be sworn in everything made in the United States, and I can attest to everything except my underwear, and I will not say where it was, but everything else was U.S. made.
It's pretty hard to do these days.
It's very difficult to do, but I did it.
Especially shoes. You can find dress shoes made here. I don't know who makes sneakers here in America.
Allen Edmond, you can get those. I'll put a plug in for them. They're made in the U.S.
Yes, and I just bought a pair about 3 weeks ago. Very comfortable too. Well, Congressman, It's a pleasure as always having you on the program, and we look forward to having you back soon. Just for our listeners, your website, please.
www.roe.house.gov.
Excellent. Okay, well, enjoy your time with your grandkids, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, guys, for having me on.
Okay, it's a pleasure. Take care. That was Congressman Phil Roe from the 1st District of the great state of Tennessee, an absolute beautiful state, by the way, and looking forward to going back there sometime soon, hopefully.